Hello, everybody. This is Sander Lutz with Decrypt, and I am joined here today by Sergey Nazarov, co-founder of Chainlink. Sergey, thank you so much for joining us.
Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
So it is a remarkably busy time for crypto policy generally in Washington, and specifically in the last few months and even in the last few days, it's been a very busy time for Chainlink. I have a number of recent developments I'd love to talk through with you, but just to start, on Friday, you had a meeting with SEC Chair Paul Atkins, and I'd love to hear more about that meeting. To start with, and just to get an understanding of where the SEC is at, this was a meeting that the SEC requested to have with you to discuss Chainlink specifically. Is that right?
I think that the goal of the meeting was really to think about how the US economy can move towards tokenization, and then also how Chainlink can fit into that vision of a next generation financial system. So the agenda was a number of topics around compliance, cross-chain connectivity, highly reliable data, and how data transmission is important for regulators when they're evaluating the state of the market, as well as how Chainlink fits into all those topics. So I would say it was a mix of topics around what we think a next generation version of the US financial system looks like, which I have to say I'm very, very positive on the SEC's forward-looking views. Many people can see those views in the July project crypto speech from Chairman Atkins, where I think now the SEC and the US government in general have the same goal as the majority of the industry, as Chainlink does, in getting tokenization of the existing financial system to be the norm. And I think this was really the main idea behind the meeting: is how do we get the US financial system to the place where a tokenized equity, a tokenized commodity, a tokenized fund, a tokenized everything can operate properly on chain and meet all the regulatory requirements that those same things meet off chain. And in many cases, what we showed them and what we've discussed with them and other regulators is that the on-chain version of a tokenized equity, commodity, or fund is actually superior to the off-chain version.
So to that point, and it has been a big and a major initiative of the Trump administration and of the SEC under Chair Atkins already. They've been very vocal about bringing the traditional financial market on chain, potentially to increase efficiency or for other benefits. So to help people at home understand, what are the challenges about doing that, and where would Chainlink fit into solving some of those challenges, and why would someone like Chair Atkins want to get your perspective on these issues?
Sure. So Chainlink is the most widely used resource to get data on chain, and data is a critical component of financial products. Financial products, as they get more advanced, actually require much more data in terms of their ability to know what's going out on in the market with market prices, in terms of their ability to do things like compliance. Identity data is a good example. Chainlink is the main provider of these different pieces of data, both into blockchains and smart contracts, and therefore also out of blockchains and smart contracts once the things are on chain. So if you're going to create these tokenized real world assets, you're going to have a data component that's critical. Similarly to how decentralized finance wasn't possible before Chainlink started putting data on chain in mass, because you can't create a decentralized finance market without the relevant data about that market, like the price.
Mm-hmm.
But the traditional finance RWA markets are even more advanced, and they're even more dependent on data. I'll give you a simple example. They, for example, require price data and compliance data. The other thing that's happening now is that there's a lot of different activity on different chains. So the purchaser might be on one chain and the asset might be on another chain. And so now, how do you interact between those two chains in a way that meets regulatory requirements? And the answer to that isn't just that you send something here and something there. You have a large list of requirements that need to be met for how an asset works, what an asset reports. One of these requirements is something that few people in the Web3 world know about: transfer agency. So a transfer agent is an entity or a third party that's responsible for taking an asset from me before they give it to you to basically confirm ownership and avoid double spends in the language of the Web3 world that is understood here. Transfer agents came out of the 70s when the DTCC, the Deposit Trust Clearing Corporation, kind of came into existence. I mean, they existed before then, but they became even more critical at that point. And so one example of what we do is we provide an ability to do what's called digital transfer agency. And digital transfer agency, for example, requires net asset value data, which is the valuation of the underlying asset that's being transferred. After you do the transfer agency process part of the process, you often have a compliance part of the process where Chainlink will provide some compliance like identity data. And then you have other parts of the process that might require a cross-chain movement. So for example, I have a stable coin on one chain, but I want to buy a tokenized fund on another chain. Now I need a transfer agency process. I need a compliance process. I need a cross-chain process. And on top of all these processes, there are legal requirements which have to be met in order for the transaction to be considered legally valid. So that answers more of your question about why is this complicated. It's complicated because in the DeFi world, everyone can do transactions without meeting any legal requirements. They don't need to look up what the legal requirements are. They don't need to know what the legal requirements are. There's just a general idea and feeling that legal requirements don't apply. That's it. So they don't matter. And most DeFi firms don't spend, an overly large amount of time or effort trying to figure them out. In the TradFi world, it's the exact opposite. Your first question in the TradFi world is often, can this transaction legally be done? Does this transaction have a transfer agent who can execute it for us? Does this transaction have a compliance process that allows it to be executed? This is really the challenge that we're working on solving, with the SEC and other regulators, is how do you merge all the problems and complexities and requirements of the existing legal system, the existing transfer agency system, the existing compliance system, and make them work on chain. But what we want to do is not just make them work on chain, we want to make them work better on chain. So, for example, in the transfer agency world, you can strike the value of a fund. So you can have a window to redeem the fund, to enter the fund or exit the fund, let's say once a day, because that's the cycle on which the valuation of the fund happens. What we're saying is we can get the fund valuation cycle to be every couple of seconds. And so now people can enter and exit funds every couple of seconds. It's not a once a day event. It's a many times an hour event. That's an example of advantage. With compliance, we're saying that instead of there being a 2 or 3 month onboarding process into multiple banks to do a transaction, if you already onboarded into an institution previously, and that institution proved on chain that you onboarded against a certain set of requirements, like investor accreditation, not being on the OFAC list, various other conditions, then that onboarding is reusable for other institutions. So now you don't have to go through another 2-3 month onboarding with someone else. So there's actually a lot of really big advantages that we're showing the regulators that we are in a unique position to show, because basically no one else right now in our industry works on all of these problems at once. No one right now can build you a highly reliable, highly compliant smart contract that can ingest all the necessary data, comply with all the necessary identity requirements, connect to all the necessary chains, and meet all the necessary regulatory conditions for the transaction to happen. That's a kind of unique position that Chainlink is in at this point. For example, last year, before we started working more with the US government, Chainlink did the most transactions in Singapore's MAS Guardian framework that we announced last year at the Singapore FinTech Festival. And likewise, we've done multiple transactions now of various types with Hong Kong Monetary Authority. And so now Chainlink is in a position where, and this is what many people don't understand about Chainlink, it's not that it's a data oracle or a bridging oracle or even a compliance oracle. It's that because it's all of those things together, it's now defining a set of standards for how transactions work and how they work in the RWA sector, how they work across chains, how they work across jurisdictions and TradFi institutions. And there's multiple independent firms that have analyzed what is the most popular real-world asset technology, and they continually find Chainlink month after month at the very top of the list in number one because of all these different flows that we power and no one else powers.
So the function you're describing is obviously extremely important, right? Without it, um, traditional markets could not move on chain, specifically when it comes to that compliance angle with transfer agents. And if it sounds like what you were saying outright is that Chainlink is the only company currently in the US in the position to fulfill that function. Is that a somewhat unique situation where if the SEC is talking to you about this process, right, if they were to do it in the near term, which we'll get to the timeline, but it sounds like they want to move on this stuff pretty imminently, that they would naturally only be able to work with you at this moment, or that there wouldn't necessarily be a spectrum of firms that would be able to provide the same function at the level of compliance that the US government would need. Is that your understanding of how the playing field looks right now?
So there are private firms right now that do transfer agency for digital assets. There are private firms that provide data. There are private firms that provide some cross-chain connectivity. What I'm saying is that Chainlink is the only platform where all of that stuff comes together in one system, and that gives us a deep understanding of every step in the process. While other firms tend to focus on only one specific step on the process. And that's also why Chainlink is becoming more popular with institutions. It's because institutions generally just want a solution. They don't want to cobble together 15 different startups and hope that they work together well enough to make a transaction happen. They just need a system that'll get the thing done. And that's what Chainlink has now become. So I just want to be clear that there are other transfer agency contracts and systems. Chainlink is the only system that has transfer agency, an open compliance model, cross-chain connectivity, data standards, and an environment like CRE where you can compose all of this into a single workflow. That's what I mean.
To the point we were talking about, or just mentioning earlier, about the timeline, based on your meeting with Chair Atkins on Friday and hearing where his mind is at, or based on the questions he was asking you, did you get any sense of how immediately, in the near, medium, or long term, they want to move with this process? Was it more in the theoretical stage, or were the questions pretty practical and granular?
We didn't discuss specific timelines, but I get a sense that there is real urgency to create real change. And we've already been able to do some of that together with the SEC on the topic of transfer agency. Through our previous conversations with them, they have issued some new guidance on their views on transfer agency, which comes directly out of our meetings. That has already happened. And on that same day that I was meeting with Chairman Atkins, our team, without me, was going back to meet with the staff and to discuss, further additional guidance and key ideas on the topics of compliance, transfer agency, cross-chain, and these other key topics. So I would say that there is already progress being made. So I would say there's already very practical, real steps happening now. I would say there's real urgency because the Trump administration has made this a clear priority. That same day that I was meeting with Chairman Atkins, I was also lucky enough to go to the White House and meet with people there from the digital asset group, the new executive director, and others. And so I feel that the Trump administration has created a set of priorities that regulators and the departments in Washington are eager and focused on making progress on. And so if I have to personally make a guess, I would say that there's going to be really significant progress this year and in the first half of next year on a lot of these different topics. But that's just my personal guess.
Well, the other thing is, I mean, these are, in the last few months, the SEC and the CFTC have really aggressively barreled forward with their intention to fulfill the White House's wishes to act very proactively when it comes to crypto policy or even integrating traditional markets with blockchain networks. Did it feel like, because it seems like the SEC has already made statements to the effect that regardless of where, legislation moves in Congress, and there's currently a pending market structure bill, that they want to act on this stuff now. Did you get the sense or the impression from these recent meetings that with such a goal as moving traditional markets on chain, that they're ready to proactively take the steps to do that, as opposed to waiting for this legislation, which may come or may not, or may take some time? Did it feel like they are very proactive and eager, like you were mentioning, to move forward with this on their own at the regulatory level?
Yeah, I feel that they were already eager to start moving forward. We have had multiple meetings with them. I think our team is one of the teams that's been meeting the most with them repeatedly out of the rest of the crypto industry. And we get a sense that, these conversations are honing in on practical real world problems and places where changes can be made to improve the quality of a blockchain based financial asset from a regulatory point of view, to make it safer for institutions to hold and deal with blockchain based securities and other on chain financial products. So I think I don't think they're really waiting for, I think your question is, are they waiting for the legislative process? My feeling is that they're not waiting. My feeling is that they're actively doing things now. That's what we're experiencing. And I'm very, very grateful for that. I mean, it's really just been fantastic working, with the various regulators. I think, Hester Peirce, Commissioner Peirce, we're extremely grateful to her as an industry. I'm very grateful to her. Chairman Atkins now is taking things to a whole new level, thankfully. So I really think this is the best situation our industry can be in. And I also think people don't fully appreciate just what it means that the U.S. regulator has this position, because the U.S. regulator really sets the agenda for a lot of other regulators in other countries. So while it seems like we're talking about the SEC and U.S. regulation, I am pretty sure what we're actually talking about is what, in large part, global regulation of our industry will look like, which is in my opinion one of the big final missing pieces of taking the financial system and turning it into a blockchain based system, which is what I define as mainstream adoption. So, another way to phrase this is, you have people who are completely empowered from the highest levels of government to encourage and enable and accelerate rapid mainstream adoption of smart contracts, blockchains, and Oracle networks as the preferred way to do transactions in the US and therefore the global financial system. I mean, that's just kind of like a mind-blowing situation to be in relative to where we were a year ago.
Going briefly to the meeting you had at the White House on Friday, and with Patrick Witt, who's the new executive director of the President's Working Group on Digital Assets. For a number of months, and under the leadership of Bo Hines, who previously held that position, the priorities seem to be coming from the White House. One, getting that massive report out that they put in July, which domino effect led to, Project Crypto at the SEC and putting out its recommendations. There was also a huge push from the White House to get the Genius Act passed, which they succeeded in helping with in July. From your meeting on Friday, what was your impression about where the White House's current priorities are when it comes to crypto policy? What were the big headline things they were either trying to get your thoughts on, or you got the sense from them are front of mind for them right now in this moment?
So I think that office and Bo and David Sachs have done a great job coordinating all the complexities and nuanced groups of Washington to get things to move for our industry. I think you're right that the big wins there was the stablecoin legislation, then getting this report out, now market structure. So market structure is definitely a big focus area, obviously, because that's the next big bill that's gonna help figure out a lot. There is a lot of other stuff in that report, and I do get the sense that the recommendations in that report were not just something that they had to put into a report. I get a sense that many of those recommendations are things that they're going to look to follow through on and take action on. And so I think that the moment, what's happening in the moment in Washington, D.C. is always very important, because that's usually the only thing that you can get done, is what's the trend, what's on the floor, what's getting voted on, what can we get done now. That, I would say, is market structure. But what's next, I would look at the recommendations in the report, because some of those recommendations I think they are going to do and take seriously and move forward on. So that report is actually something worth looking at.
So real quick before we move on, just with the meeting with Chair Atkins and the meeting with the White House, I'm curious, off the top of your head, was there any moment from either meeting that surprised you the most? Because obviously you came in with a lot of expectations and you're probably mostly on the same page with them. But starting with the meeting with Chair Atkins, was there any moment or detail of that meeting that surprised you pleasantly or otherwise that you weren't expecting?
I think just the positivity. So the folks that work at a place like the SEC are not always as excited or as positive about things, because they're often involved in all kinds of very serious issues around consumer protection and a number of other difficult situations where they have to come up with ways to protect the economy and make the system work well and grow at the same time. But this meeting was very interesting in that we were discussing kind of the future, and the future is exciting. And I could sense a very real excitement from the chairman and from a number of his key staffers that were there in the meeting, that there was a genuine excitement about the future that we were discussing and describing in relation to compliance, data, connectivity across chains, the ability to take tokenization in the US to the next level. And that was probably the most energizing and positive thing. Really, at after the meeting was over, me and my general counsel and our deputy general counsel, we gave each other high fives, because we were just so thrilled about the response that we had gotten to some of these ideas from a group that's usually pretty um, pretty conservative and reserved, and that there was a lot of positivity on these things. So I would say that is very that was the impression. That's very much the impression I was left with.
Just for some texture, like, could you give an example, like one of those ideas that you floated that maybe was something the SEC is looking for to streamline this process? Like, what was one such idea, that maybe they hadn't heard before or were excited about how these things might work better on chain, or how Chainlink might be able to help these processes?
I'm not sure exactly what details I'm able to share, but I would say that the three main topics we covered were transfer agency, and making sure that the transfer agency process and the use of blockchains as books and records happens in a way that enables tokenization of public equity and various other types of tokenization. That was a topic we had already spoken to them about many times. There was already new guidance, or I don't know the exact term, new ideas that they were able to release with our help earlier in the year. So that's a topic they were already familiar with. The next topic that was a big topic was compliance. Compliance across chains, compliance in relation to transactions on any one chain against identity and policies. That, I think, was an exciting topic for them. And then the final and big overarching topic across the whole thing was data and the use of something called unified golden records. So the ability to understand what's going on in the market, because the blockchain is a reliable data transfer and transparency mechanism. This idea, I think, is extremely compatible with what they understand is the value of blockchains, right? Is that blockchains can create a kind of transparency about transactions, about market activity, that historically I haven't really seen regulators or institutions fully appreciate. I think our industry, the DeFi industry and the public chain industry, has appreciated that I can go on Etherscan and see what's going on. I can look into Aave's contracts and see what's going on. But The regulatory version of that, the institutional version of that, I think is just now starting to fully sink in. And it's actually very powerful because one of the biggest problems in institutional and in institution regulation process is what is going on where. Like this is also something you can see in the 2008 financial crisis, where it was just very difficult to understand who had what it was worth, what they were doing with it, when it was sold or bought, who traded it to who, what was going on, what is going on is still a basic question that is often unanswered in the current institutional and regulatory environment. But I think what's starting to happen now is that if you're able to put data on chain, if you're able to track cross-chain transactions correctly, if you're able to comply on chain with identity on chain, you can know what's going on. You can know that this accredited investor sent this token to that accredited investor. The token was backed by, the relevant assets based on proof of reserves, and that the token transaction was done under this set of laws and this set of laws, and the smart contracts on both chains checked that the conditions of the transactions were met for both sets of laws. So now you have an international transaction with two different regulators, with two different sets of laws that both of them can look into, and they can understand what happened in this transaction. They don't need to ask a bank for records. They don't need to contact anyone and try to look into what happened. They inherently know it from the unified golden record on the blockchain. So I think this is where we kind of have a real opportunity with regulators.
So on a similar theme of transparency, big news a few weeks ago was that Chainlink had partnered with the Department of Commerce and with the federal government to begin integrating federal government data, including GDP and other statistics, bridging that into DeFi and bridging that into the crypto ecosystem. And Chainlink is playing a crucial role in this partnership, which is ongoing and is only going to ramp up as time goes on. I've seen you were at the White House earlier. We were discussing at the crypto summit, and you were also there for the Genius Act signing. But I think it's just interesting to learn how, everyone knows that the Trump administration is very pro crypto. They say it often, they say it frequently, and they say it generally. But on this more granular level, how does something like this come together? If you could shed a little light on, how does a process such as this, the Trump administration saying they want to do things more on chain, maybe they're hypothetically interested in bringing data on chain, how do those general conversations become a specific partnership like this one?
I think what that political shift does is it empowers a select few people in places like the Department of Commerce, very smart, really hardworking people that had been wanting to do stuff on chain, but didn't have the necessary political support behind them. And once they get that political support, what they do is they seek out, how to do it. In the Department of Commerce case, Chainlink put the vast majority of data on chain from that initial implementation at the highest frequency for the most amount of data points. So I would say that Chainlink is kind of the main and most kind of active provider putting that data there. I do think that our work with them and other departments in the federal government will continue because there is now this kind of political trend and a political value from doing blockchain related things as a department. But we are also really actively looking at not only how does the data go on chain, but how does that data get utilized in various use cases by various users who are already Chainlink users, who have already integrated Chainlink and know how to use Chainlink to get relevant data into their contracts, which is by far the largest user base of that type, with Chainlink powering over 60% of DeFi globally, and on popular chains like Ethereum at well over 80%. So we have a big user base that we're now going to go to and talk to about, hey, how are you going to use this data to do something valuable? We've already found a few exciting use cases. I think in every department of government, I've seen people who are fans of cryptocurrencies, fans of blockchains, fans of Chainlink. And so the federal government, I think over time, gradually, will become a larger and larger user of Chainlink, in my opinion, because the federal government moves at its own speed, but fundamentally the federal government does adopt technology if it has fundamental value. And I think blockchains and Oracle networks and smart contracts have a lot of fundamental value.
So when you mentioned that people at the Commerce Department seemed to already be wanting to do this and now they felt empowered to do it, what is your understanding of why they wanted to do this? Because there are explanations going from one, it's it's pro crypto, it's showing how close you are with the industry. Some people say it's good for transparency. Others say that this actually allows for the creation of sounder financial markets or more opportunities or prediction markets or other new types of tokenization. What was your understanding of why the Department of Commerce saw opportunity in this sort of partnership?
So I think it's all of those. The reality of working with large institutions, in my experience, is that they need to take small incremental steps. They can't take very big, high risk steps unless there's like a massive, massive gain, which in this case, the gain is that the US government and the president have decided that they want to go into the modernization of the federal government and the US financial system with blockchains, right? So I would say that this is an incremental step. This is a low risk, efficient way to begin the process of getting involved in the blockchain ecosystem, working with blockchain technology. And so what we're trying to do in our work with the US Department of Commerce and other departments in Washington is make sure that they have a positive experience, and that not only do they put the data on chain, but that something positive comes out of that beyond just publishing the data. And that's what we're trying to think through more and more. And hopefully we'll have some new interesting developments there. But the first step with institutions this big is usually just that. It's just a first step that they need to make to show that something can work, that it has value, that it's worth doing. Personally, from my interactions with people in DC, I can already see many steps beyond this happening. It's just not a fast process in the government. Is the nuance.
So where paint a picture a little bit, or to get us excited, where could something like this feasibly go? And there's the pie in the sky, but also, like, do you think feasibly, even with the rest of the time before 2029, the rest of the time of the second Trump administration, like, what could some of those slightly more bold steps look like on chain with the federal government?
I mean, I'd love to do that. I really would. It's difficult for me because I'm not sure how many of these things we're able to disclose. I think that personally, I think that blockchains are really good mechanisms for enabling security and cybersecurity and guaranteeing the integrity of existing Web2 systems. I think that blockchains are very good at transmitting key pieces of data that need to be made public or need to be used in markets. And I also think that blockchains are very reliable voting systems, which can be used to track voting accurately and making it immune to manipulation. So I really can't speak about the details of what we're doing with different groups, but personally, myself, I feel that those three applications of blockchains and Oracle networks working together are very significant. Cybersecurity, data for transparency and market purposes, as well as the ability to guarantee voting systems.
Well, as to the last point, that's been a very vocal issue in the first months of the Trump administration, and even in the last 2 weeks. The Trump administration has been focused on issues related to voting integrity and election integrity, etc. Have you had any conversations with the Trump administration related to voting and voting integrity as it pertains to on-chain systems?
I mean, we've had conversations with different groups inside of Washington about, voting and blockchain systems being used for voting. I'm not going to probably name exactly who we've talked to, as you know, it's still early days there. I would say that the nuance with voting and blockchains in the U.S. Political system is actually much more around identity than it is around using blockchains. I think the interesting nuance in the US is that identity and a federally issued identity is a very sensitive topic. It's a very politically charged topic for both parties. And so before you even process voter rolls, or before you confirm that a voter hasn't switched states and isn't voting twice, so they're not double spending their vote, and before you have ways to guarantee proper node distribution to make sure that voting rolls aren't manipulated, and that external state actors can't get in and manipulate them, before you get into all those interesting questions, your first question is how are we going to create an identity layer for someone to prove their identity as a registered real voter? And this is a political topic that is very sensitive, that I think, it's not a technology issue. It's a political issue about whether Democrats and Republicans, who both have their own fears about creating identity, even if it was a narrowly focused form of identity on voting, that issue will have to be resolved before you have this back end technology, blockchains and Oracle networks working together to create a voting system.
With something like that, how far away are we? Is the technology already there and it's a matter of the willpower, or is it something that would take some time to develop to make it ready for use in such a sensitive, significant application?
It's 100% willpower. 100%. Technology is ready to go. Oracle networks ready to go. Some cases, even identity systems, everything's ready to go. It's just a question of how the U.S. government wants to approach the topic of identity. They want to approach the topic of identity for financial transactions in very specific ways. How they want to approach the topic of identity for voting is a very unresolved issue, and that's not an issue that a technology platform or standard or open source way of doing something like identity can resolve. So we can absolutely provide the technology that would enable highly secure systems using blockchains and Oracle networks to do things like log verification and other key cybersecurity activities. We can absolutely enable the proper use of data and compliance on chain. And voting is really just another type of on-chain data that would have to be synchronized across chains. So that's something that can definitely be done. It isn't. It just isn't something that I think politically DC is yet, anywhere close to a practical level of agreement on.
As you mentioned, also though, these things, it's gaining trust. Funny enough, or baby steps with something like the program that's already initiated, that with the Department of Commerce, and potentially future steps like you alluded to, potentially working with other government agencies, etc. How imminently might those future steps be announced? Is that something that in the near term there might be more news soon?
I don't know when they'll be announced. We are working on next steps on various data initiatives and other initiatives with the U.S. Federal government, and we're in discussions with some state governments as well. It's very unpredictable, the rate at which, the speed at which they're going to want to announce things. We're in September now, so everyone's back from vacation, so hopefully things can move quickly. But all of these agencies, departments, have their own process, which is unpredictable for approvals. Plus, they have other priorities that they want to announce. So I can tell you that we're definitely moving ahead into a set of next steps, at least on the data side, and on some different cross-chain initiatives that we're also starting to discuss more. But I can't predict exactly when.
Got it. And because commerce seems like a very natural place to start, because so much of what they do is involved releasing key data to the public that obviously is a natural segue, but there are plenty of other, I imagine, federal agencies where the use case is a very natural fit, right? Where other sorts of releases of data to the public or even internal dissemination of data.
I think Oracle networks and Chainlink systems do a great job at creating internal data integrity. So internal data integrity is very important from a cybersecurity point of view. And that's something that the US government is extremely, extremely sensitive to and extremely, extremely interested in. I think there's the ability to create guarantees of data accuracy and data integrity publicly. So Chainlink is able to validate and provide proofs and prove that data is a certain way. And that is valuable for transparency and market purposes. And then I also think that the government faces a number of trust issues where there are different groups that are arguing with each other about if something happened or it didn't happen, right? Did the vote happen correctly? Did the vote not happen correctly? Was the machine manipulated? Was it not manipulated? These are fundamentally trust issues. And they're trust issues that can be solved technically if people want us to solve them technically. So I would put it in those three categories if you're thinking about it broadly. Internal data integrity, external accuracy and transparency of data publicly and for markets, and then various trust issues, supply chain trust issues, voting trust issues, various trust issues that the US government has that can be resolved.
And do you expect in some of these things that you're excited to roll out at some point with other federal agencies and with other state governments, are those going to touch on all three of those categories? You're kind of starting with, I mean, trust you kind of get to eventually. That's kind of a bigger one, right?
It's always very specific. The people that want internal data integrity for their internal systems and to be able to verify logs and verify tamper proofness are not interested in making anything public. The people interested in making things public via on-chain data, they're interested to some degree in cross-chain. They're interested in the reach of the data. They're interested in markets because a lot of the data is economic in nature. The trust issue use cases are always very specific. They're very, very specific implementations. That's one of the things the Chainlink community and the people who implement Chainlink for these institutions beyond us usually do a good job at is they're able to take a very specific problem and think through how to solve that problem. And the problem might have many different parts or parts of it. It might have a data issue, it might have a cross-chain issue, might have a compliance issue. And that's once again why Chainlink is, in my opinion, so unique. In that if you have a data issue and a compliance issue and a cross-chain issue, you really can't solve it right now with any other system other than Chainlink. You can try and use three separate systems that don't work with each other and don't want to work with each other. Or you can just go to a single platform. So Chainlink has really become now closer to something like an AWS, where you can show up and you enter an ecosystem of providers, of primitives, of building blocks, of tools and services, where you can solve your problem in a comprehensive way.
Well, an astonishing amount that's already been happening over the last few months, and I'm sure plenty more to come that Chainlink will be playing a major part in. But for now, Sergey, thank you so much for joining us and sharing the latest of what's happening in Washington.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.